Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, aka the guy that's had breakfast for dinner for the last 9 weeks due to Wandavision taking up all my Friday mornings. We're all grieving for the show being over now, but that just feels like it might be love persevering, and throughout this video we're going to be discussing our favourite Easter eggs from the season. We start off with Wanda and Vision driving into the town of Westview and get a minor glimpse at the sign. This would of course come to change throughout the season, but the name Westview itself has a number of cool little things in it. Firstly, the two words in the town start with a W and V, which are also the initials of Wanda and Vision. The word TV is also in the middle of the name, and taking a west view of the world means that you have an altered perception of it. We later see at the end of episode 4 that the slogan is home, it's where you make it, and this hints to how Wanda made the hex. The first episode parodies the Dick Van Dyke Show, and this of course appears later on in episode 8. The title card for both the series are very similar, but whereas in the intro for the Dick Van Dyke Show, Dick tripped over the footstool, Vision passes through the chair. Vision's tie has a strange symbol on it, and this contains 2 dots inside a rectangular shape. If we take these to be a representation of Wanda and Vision, then the rectangle could be a symbol for the hex itself, and the 2 dots on the outside could represent Agatha and Hayward, who are both somewhat the villains of the show. Though Agatha all along is so good, I really can't stay mad at her. Now in the kitchen, Vision is hit in the head with a plate, and Wanda makes a joke about him having an indestructible head. This is a joke because, well, the lad gave Thanos a piece of his Mind Stone, and it got ripped out of his head, killing the character in the process. The pair look at a calendar with a heart symbol on it above the 23rd, and this is likely a reference to the deed that we see in episode 8, in which we learn that the Vision bought the house and put a heart symbol on it with a cute little message. I'm not crying, I swear. Now the 23, that could also be referencing the 23 MCU movies that preceded the series, and in general 23 is seen as a number that is key to everything. Don't even get me started on that Jim Carrey movie. Now it's not too long before Agnes the nosy neighbour shows up, and the first hint that she's Agatha Harkness is her name, which if you take the first and last letters of and put them together, you get Agnes. I swear that's the last time I'll use that Easter egg. You can rest now. Agatha also says the word charmed, a typical phrase associated with witches, and states her wedding anniversary to Ralph is on the 2nd of June, which was the start of the Salem witch trials. Agnes also teaches Wanda seduction techniques because, as we learn, she really wants Wanda and Vision to have kids. This comes from a magazine titled Glamorous, and a glamour is basically a spell that makes people seem appealing, potentially hinting to Agatha being someone that seems nice. Yeah, it's a reach. Now that night, Vision's boss, Mr. Hart, comes over, and his wife is played by Deborah Jo Rupp, who is sitcom royalty after featuring in that 70s show. Wanda actually welcomes Mr. Hart by putting her hands over his eyes, and this is said to be a Sokovian greeting. Later on in episode 8, we see Wanda's mother puts her hands over her eyes, and this could be a callback to that moment and how she feels within her home. Wanda ends up making breakfast for dinner, and this is mocked by Agatha at the end of episode 8 when she says she could be using her powers for more important things. When the wine bottle is being poured, we can also see the words Maison du Mépris, which translates to House of Contempt. The neck of the bottle has the letter M on it though, and as Mépris starts with an M, we can take this as being House of M, which is of course a graphic novel that the show pulls from. There's a famous cover in that, which has Wanda's face appear in almost a Tetris-like manner. This style not only shows up when Wanda is building the house in episode 8 as a way for the bricks to connect, but Monica is too put together in a similar fashion when she's brought back by the blip. Mr. Hart gets angry and says there's so much chaos going on in the house, and shoutouts to CJ Miller for pointing out that this is likely a reference to the chaos magic that we later learn Wanda pulls from. Jump to the commercials and we see a toaster made by Stark Industries that, when powered up, makes a similar sound to the arc reactor charging. There's also a blinking red light in the middle of it that looks very similar to the one on the missile that Wanda encountered as a kid. These commercials could also represent certain aspects of the Infinity Stones, and due to the Toastmate 2000 looking like a face, the light could be seen as the Mind Stone. That might be a reach, but Vision was actually given the nickname Toaster in the comics, so I'll take back my hand, put it in my pocket, and let you know, yeah, that there's no reach in here, there's no more allowed. Now we cut to episode 2 and we get an animated intro that starts off with the moon and stars. These form the shape of a hexagon, and the intro as a whole mimics the one from Bewitched in several ways. Bewitched followed a witch as she tried to hide her powers from the world, and the house from it actually appears later in the series as Agatha's home. We can also spot the Grim Reaper's helmet, who has appeared throughout a number of comics centering around the pair, and the amount of times I spent theorizing that he was going to be in the show, I don't even want to get into it. Now in the intro, we move through the town and see a supermarket that has a kitty litter advert named Auntie A's. Agatha actually refers to herself as Auntie Agnes later on in the series, likely tying back to this advert. Someone actually pointed out to me that Agnes is like kitty litter because she's full of shit, and I feel so bad because I forgot to screenshot the name of the person who came up with that joke to give them credit, but you know who you are, and we'll just have to call you the Silent Guardian, the Watchful Protector, that I don't have to say thank you to, because I'm taking all the credit, I'm going to be honest. Now, there's also one for Bova Milk, who in the comic books was a mutated cow that delivered Wanda's kids. I'm not even kidding on that either, and if you don't believe me, you can suck Bova D's nuts. Now, when the cartoon characters arrive in the home, Agatha is the only one who gets inside the house, whilst the others wait outside it, hinting to how she has more power than they do. Wanda and Vision start practicing their magic act under the name Glamour and Illusion. This actually calls back to the comic book Vision and the Scarlet Witch, in which there was a magical pair of the same name who popped up from time to time. The magic cupboard also has the Mind Stone on it, and we cut outside to see a toy helicopter in the bush, which we learn in episode 4 is one of the drones that's sort of sent in. We meet Agatha not long after, and her rabbit Senor Scratchy. In the comics, Agatha's son was called Nicholas Scratch, and this bunny's name is likely a reference to that too. Rabbits are also typically a symbol associated with procreation, and thus Agatha carrying this instead of her typical black cat could be the reason for the change-up. In the comics, Agatha's cat is also called Ebony, and I don't know if this is a reach. I know I said no more reaching, but it might be a bunny because Ebony, the cat, a bunny, the rabbit. Don't at me on that. Moving on, we cut to the advert and we're introduced to the Strucker watch. Strucker was the name of the scientist that experimented on her and her brother when she was younger, and these ads very much signify a trauma in Wanda's life and also happen in chronological order, with the missile coming first before the experimentation and so on. Due to its centering on time, I think this is supposed to represent the time stone, but let me know below if you disagree. Now, the talent show is thrown for the children, but as we notice, the longer the season goes on, there aren't really any kids in Westview. At one point we see Phil playing the piano, and in episode 8 we do see him hanging up an advert for piano lessons. Wanda then becomes pregnant and fast forwards time to the 70s, which is when we get a brief tour of her house. During this we can see that she has wallpaper on it that showcases the castle from Age of Ultron, which massively ties back to the first film that she appeared in. Cut to episode 3 and we see the 70s entry, the title card of which is similar to the Brady Bunch, but instead of using squares, they use hexagons. The house itself is of course modelled on the Brady Bunch home, and we're also introduced to Dr. Nielsen. In TV, Nielsen ratings refer to an audience size and growth for any given show, and him getting this name is a nice little Easter egg. In the intro, we also catch Wanda reading the Glamorous magazine, but this time it's been updated to fit a 70s design. We also see Vision, who's reading an occult-looking pregnancy book, and he does this while standing in front of an appliance store. This mashing up of the two hints to how he's actually a machine that's trying to become a father. When they're in the nursery, Vision quotes William Shakespeare and says the whole world's a stage, referring to how everyone in the Hex world is putting on an act because of Wanda's control. Wanda says she has butterflies in her stomach, and this triggers the mobile to come to life with butterflies, hinting at how she's able to alter reality and is the one behind it all. After the subliminal hints in episode 2, there's also several in this episode that hint to the big bad trying to make Wanda manifest twins. The first of these comes with Vision building a swing set with 2 swings and a seesaw, which, has to be operated by 2 people to work properly. We also cut to Phil's house and see that his lamp has 2 babies on it. There's then a bright light that shines in the house during the midpoint of the episode, and this is likely the spotlights firing up that we see Sword have at the end of the entry. Cut to the commercial, and we're introduced to Hydra Soak. Not only does this blue box potentially represent the Tesseract, it also calls back to Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. when Coulson discussed that Hydra developed soap which could control your mind. The ad itself parodies several Calgon commercials from the 70s, including the Take Me Away one. This has a woman standing in front of 4 video screens saying that she wants to be taken away, and like the one in Wandavision, we cut to her in a bath. The commercial also has 2 kids in it now, further enforcing the idea that this is the episode that Wanda will have twins in. Wanda gives birth to her 2 babies, and the second one is a complete surprise. This is actually a reference to the Vision and Scarlet Witch graphic novel, as in that Doctor Strange didn't realise that Wanda was going to have twins until she popped them both out. It's also in this episode that Wanda figures out who Monica is, and she notices her sword necklace, which we learn in episode 4 is actually her ID badge. Agatha also enforces the notion that Monica is someone that needs to go, and this is because she starts to become aware of what's going on. This also plants the idea in Vision's head that he needs to start looking closer at his wife, which eventually makes him leave so that Agatha can swoop in and offer to babysit the kids when it gets too much for Wanda. If Vision was still in the house in episode 8, then he would look after them instead of her, and in the words of Joker, it's all part of the plan. Monica is thrown outside the hex, and we hear the song Daydream Believer by the Monkees, and it also seems that Monica is waking up in some way. Up until this point, Monica has believed the daydream that she's been in, but now outside the hex, she's awakened to the truth. Episode 4 flips the script, and it's at this point that we see things from Monica's perspective. This is by far my favourite opening of any episode, and we learn that because of the snap, she was robbed of saying goodbye to her mother. Though not identical, this mirrors Wanda's journey, who too returned with the blip, only to find that the one person she cared about more than anything simply wasn't there anymore. On the whole though, the world is very happy, and when Monica returns to S.W.O.R.D., we can see that there's a new show discussing how the blip brings loved ones back. In the report we can see 2 women hugging, potentially a mother and daughter, which is somewhat of a slap in the face to Monica, who never got to say goodbye to her mum. Monica tries to open the door with her ID, but this doesn't work, and it very much juxtaposes how Wanda just blasts through the same door later on in the season, showing their differences in powers and abilities at this point. Maria's plaque also displays her nickname Photon, which was first seen on her jet all the way back in Captain Marvel. Monica also goes under this moniker, establishing how she's carrying on her mother's mission here. Cut to her arriving outside the hex, and we're introduced to Jimmy Woo, who does a card trick. This was of course set up in Ant-Man and the Wasp, where he was fascinated by Scott's magic. Monica flies a drone in, and on it we can see the colours of Captain Marvel. Jump back to her solo film, and you might remember that Monica helped her to choose these as a kid, showing that the colours have stuck with her for a long time. Monica gets sucked into the hex, we're reintroduced to Darcy, and S.W.O.R.D. start their investigation, which leads to them IDing people from the town. Agatha's ID isn't present because she's of course operating under a fake name, so she's pretty much impossible to track down, though I'm not sure they could, even if they knew who Agatha was. We also learn that the Hex is using CMBR, which is radiation that dates back all the way to the Big Bang, and this could be due to Wanda's power drawing from the Infinity Stones, which we discovered in Infinity War were created along with it. Throughout this episode, we discover that it was Jimmy Woo who did the broadcast in episode 2, but from the outside we see how Dottie's reaction and blood was completely edited out of the show. This not only happened with the Vision in the prior episode, but also in this one when Monica is tossed out of the Hex. A cool little detail happens when she's thrown out, as she passes through 4 walls, and shoutouts to New Rockstars for noting that this is likely due to this scene literally breaking the 4th wall and taking us to the outside world. The song which ends the episode is Voodoo Child, which could not only be referencing the twins who gain abilities, but also Wanda herself, who we discover in episode 8 had powers as a child. Episode 5 sees us return to the sitcoms, and we join Wanda and the Vision in the 80s themed entry. There's a cool little callback to Family Ties, as that sitcom had a sofa with 1 blue cushion on it, which we also see that Wanda's has. Agatha arrives and breaks character on her own, without Vision having to use the Mind Stone, showing that she is capable of doing this anyway. Agatha is present the both times that the kids age up, likely hinting to her being behind it, and she also wants to force them to a 3rd time, which is probably why she murders Sparky. #NeverForget. Sparky itself was present in the Vision graphic novel, and originally it was a dog that was called Zeke, who died after digging up the Grim Reaper's corpse. The dog was then resurrected as a synthezoid one called Sparky, and this is where the name originates from. Agatha says kids, you can't control them, and this might be a reference to when she was younger and her mother tried to stop her from dabbling in dark magic, but it of course backfired. Every time that we see Billy and Tommy, they also always wear the colours associated with their comic book counterparts, hammering home the idea that they will become Wiccan and Speed. Cut to the intro, and this combines several from the decade. The family painting thing is a nod to the opening of Family Ties, and the photo of the cast growing up through the years is playing on when the same thing happened in Growing Pains. In Full House's intro, there was shots of the family running on a field of grass, which too is present in the Wandavision copy. Elizabeth Olsen's real-life twin sisters actually starred in that show, so here we have a big meta joke about her playing a parent in a parody of a show in which her twin sisters featured. Wanda's kids themselves, as well as Evan Peters, also very much fit into the sitcom trope known as Cousin Oliver syndrome. This is typically defined as when a declining show decides to introduce a new, either funny or cute character in order to try and pull an audience back in. However, this often goes badly. I tell you what, Cousin Oliver, I feel badly for all the crap you had to go through growing up. I'm sorry. Now cut back to the sword facility, and we're played footage by Hayward that shows Wanda apparently taking Vision's body. We learn that this is all actually edited, and that she didn't steal the body, meaning that Hayward was lying. However, this shows similarities between Wanda and Hayward, as both have carried out edits to seem a certain way, cementing that they both control the information that they want people to see. Darcy also says Vision is playing Father Knows Best, and this is a nod to a sitcom from 1954 that the first couple of episodes of the show took influence from. Speaking of influence, Vision frees Norm from his hypnosis, and he says you have to stop her, not you have to stop Wanda. This pretty much means that it can be applied to Agatha as well, and in retrospect, it's a really nice little scene. Now we're halfway through the video, and if you're enjoying it so far, I'd massively appreciate the thumbs up, and make sure you subscribe for breakdowns like this each and every week. Now Hayward sends in a drone with Stark Industries written on it, which Wanda destroys. If we look at the parallels of her life and her children's lives as a whole, we can also see why this is so triggering. She and her twin brother were of course haunted by a Stark Industry missile when they were younger, and with their parents they lived in this bubble surrounded by sitcoms until their lives drastically changed because of this one event. Wanda somewhat sees history repeating itself, with Hayward sending in this Stark Industries missile to potentially kill her and her kids, but rather than let the same thing happen, she takes matters into her own hands. On the outside, she makes all the soldiers turn their guns on Hayward, and this is something similar to what Magneto did in the first X-Men movie. Depending on what continuity you subscribe to, Magneto is Wanda's father, so this is like a cool little father-daughter moment. She also only goes after Hayward and says that she'll never let anyone take Vision from her again, and this of course sets up the reveal in episode 8 that he now owns Vision's body. Cut to the commercials and we see an advert for Largo's paper towels. This is the name of the city that opens Civil War up, and we all know that Wanda made a huge mistake there that altered the public's perception of the Avengers. Though I did initially think that this was meant to be the Reality Stone due to the red liquid used in it, on further reflection I think it might represent the Power Stone, as the towel has the power to clean up even the biggest spills. Available in all good shops now. Vision starts to suspect something is up, and I absolutely love how Wanda rolls the credits instead of facing the argument. The show has very much been about facing up to the truth, even if it's painful. I think this scene is so well put together. Evan Peters is introduced as a recast Pietro, and he's very similar to Uncle Jesse from Full House in both his attitude and dress. Next we get to episode 6, the Halloween themed one, which is based on the chapter from Vision and the Scarlet Witch that features trick-or-treaters that have turned into the monsters they were dressed as. We open up with a Malcolm in the Middle intro that contains song lyrics which tell Wanda to keep the illusion going. This entire entry adopts the fourth wall breaking tropes that the show utilised, and Pietro is pretty much exactly how the big brother in the series is portrayed. Agatha also features wearing some jeans with naughty written on them, hinting at her true identity. Throughout the episode, we also get a big clue that she's a witch because she dresses like one at one point. All of the characters in this entry adopt their comic book accurate costumes, hinting towards their true identities, which of course is revealed later on with her. Wanda says she's dressed as a Sokovian fortune teller, and this is a nod to her mother in the comics Magda, who actually was one. Pietro's hair is also gelled up wildly, and the costume designer on the show said this was done on purpose as a reference to Wolverine. The character also refers to the two kids as devil spawns, and this is a nod to how in the source material it was actually Mephisto that created them. The phrase kick-ass is used, and this is also a callback to how Evan Peters and Aaron Taylor-Johnson starred in that movie together before the pair went on to play Quicksilver. In the sword base, Monica, Jimmy and Darcy are cast out, and shoutouts to Ryan from Screen Crush for pointing out they sneak back into the base using ponchos, similar to how Thor did in his first solo film. The commercial has a claymation character instead of the man and woman who disappear for this week's episode, and this could be a nod to the snap and how people were dusted and brought back. The ad has a shark in it, and the purple shades that appear on his surfboard are likely a reference to Agatha Harkness, who's typically associated with this colour. The shark gives the boy who wears red like Wanda a yogurt that he's unable to open, and this could represent how Agatha is keeping Wanda occupied while she drains the life out of her, similar to what she did to the witches during 1693. The boy is stuck on an island similar to the bubble that the Hex exists in, and as this commercial deals with death, it could be a nod to the Soul Stone. We then see Wanda and Co walking in front of the Coronet Cinema, which is showing The Incredibles and The Parent Trap. The Incredibles is about a family of superheroes, which is very much the same as this series, and The Parent Trap involves twins switching places, which could be a nod to the two Pietros. Vision goes to the outskirts of the town, namely Ellis Avenue, which is likely a reference to President Ellis, who we met in Iron Man 3. Vision comes across Agatha, who unlike everyone else is able to talk and respond before Vision brings her out of her slumber. The character is lost even though she lives in the city, and she also cackles like a witch at one point, hinting to what's going on. Upon waking up, she goes for her brooch, which isn't there, and pretty much plants the idea in Vision's mind that he should leave the Hex, probably so she can sink her claws into Wanda. Her and Pietro go to the square and have a heart-to-heart, in which he convinces her that the Hex is something special. This is similar to the story House of M, as in that we learn it was actually Quicksilver that convinced her to create the fake reality. Pietro appears to be dead at one point, and we can also see the bullet holes in his costume that the Aaron Taylor-Johnson version died from. Jump to episode 7, which follows the mockumentary format that was made popular in the 2000s due to shows like The Office and Modern Family. We start with Wanda waking up in her bed and can see that Vision's pillow and the duvet are covered in hexagons. However, her pillow isn't, showing that she's somewhat separate from the Hex, and though she exists inside of it, she's not subject to the same rules as everyone else. When she goes downstairs, we see her eating the cereal Sugar Snaps, and it could be possible that the snap is a reference to what Thanos did in Infinity War. There's also a maze on the back of the box, which might be a nod to how people are trapped in the Hex. The news we hear in the background is broadcast by WNDA, aka Wanda, and an NDA is a term in media used to keep people from talking about things, much like how Wanda has with the people in the Hex. Now the intro has similar music to The Office, and the title cards look a lot like the intro to the sitcom Happy Endings, which was directed by the Russo brothers. In the intro, we see a license plate with the numbers 12, 28, 22 on, and this is actually Stan Lee's birthday, showing that the MCU is still making references to him even though he's gone. You also see what looks like a ransom note, showing that someone knows what Wanda has done, and it's likely Agatha is behind this so she can make Wanda feel guilty. There's also a fishbowl that appears with the words Wanda on it, which may be a reference to the movie A Fish Called Wanda. On the calendar, we also see a heart symbol, which has a callback to the one on the calendar from episode 1, which was the first major plot point in the show. The title itself looks similar to the font from Modern Family, and it's sad that, after this episode, no more sitcom stuff. Now cut to the outside of the Hex, and we see Darcy as an escape artist tied to a car, and this of course calls back to how she was handcuffed to one in the previous episode. Hayward's henchman is now a strongman, and the pair decide to leave after Vision frees Darcy of the illusion. As they try to head back to town, they're hit by literal roadblocks, likely from Agatha, stopping them from returning. From here, the advert shows the woman on the bench, and it discusses her depression. This is clearly a stand-in for Wanda, who was struggling with grief after the death of Vision. She's given the prescription drug Nexus, and Wanda is actually known as a Nexus being, aka a person who's the same across all realities. The woman appears in a bed by herself, which mirrors Wanda at the start of the episode, and due to the red used in the ad and the focus on realities, it's likely that this one is about the reality stone. Agatha comes and gets the kids, and she wants Wanda to look at her mole, which is typically the sign of a witch. She also talks about biting kids, which is likely playing upon the fact that witches eat children. During an interview with Wanda, someone from behind the camera talks, and if you pitch shift this, it's actually the voice of Catherine Hahn, who of course plays Agatha.
Do you think maybe this is what you deserve?
Monica goes to the hex, and before doing so, she puts numbers into a spectrometer, which is a nod to her hero name from time to time, Spectrum. If you chart these numbers on a graph, you also get a hexagon, and the front of the vehicle itself has a hexagon shape on it. The cockpit itself could also be calling back to Captain Marvel when her mother flew into space, and we also hear quotes from that film as she travels through the barrier again. Her costume upon arriving looks pretty similar to what she has in the comics, and it's likely that this is the first iteration of it. She heads to Wanda's and ends up doing a superhero landing like Deadpool, but Agatha shows up before she can snap her out of reality. In Agatha's, Wanda realizes that something is up because it's not perfect due to the cicada that's on the curtains. In the comics, this was actually one of the first forms that Mephisto took, and it's also a nod to the Silence of the Lambs when Clarice realized who Buffalo Bill was. We get Agatha all along, the song of the century, and this is playing on the intro of the Munsters, which the font for the skit is very similar to. Episode 8 opens with the Marvel Studios logo, which changes to purple, showing that we are now watching things with Agatha in control. Agatha's magic is purple, and this is because she pulls from the Dark Dimension, which we saw Dormammu lived in Doctor Strange. The scene is very similar to Agatha's death in the comics, in which she was burned at the stake by the Salem Seven. Cut to Agatha's basement, and the runes are explained to her, which also exist in hexagons. We go through Wanda's life, namely her childhood, and from here meet her mother and father. Her dad is called Ulrich, which could be playing on the name Eric, the real name of Magneto, who is her father in the source material. We see her favourite sitcom is The Dick Van Dyke Show, and her favourite episode is the Walnut one. This centres around the main character being stuck in a dream, whilst lots of weird things happen with walnuts, and this turned into a nightmare much in the same way that the series has. We see the Stark missile land, and this of course looks very similar to the one that was shown in Iron Man. Next up is Wanda's time in the Hydra labs, and though it's difficult to think about why she would have done this, Captain America 2 let a German scientist experiment on him for the good of his country, which is likely how these moments were sold to the people. Wanda sees a vision of her future in the Mind Stone, and this is likely the final form of the Scarlet Witch, which Wanda is given as a name in this episode. In her cell, she watches an episode of The Brady Bunch with a doll in it that Vision actually practiced changing diapers on all the way back in episode 3. We see Wanda after the events of Civil War, and Vision walks through the wall similar to how he did in that movie. Vision drops the best line in the MCU, and we then see Wanda enter S.W.O.R.D. with a similar news report running to what there was with Monica's entry. Vision is sprawled out in pieces, and this is a callback to the comics in which his body was dismantled in the West Coast Avengers. His memory was also wiped on this, similar to White Vision, and Wanda says, "I can't feel you," which is of course a callback to Infinity War, where the two said, "I just feel you" to one another. Wanda travels to Westview and recreates Vision, giving him a massive dong. The whole town transforms, and we also see an ad for the Lagos paper towels, with a woman snapping her fingers on it, similar to what Thanos did. Agatha calls her the Scarlet Witch, and you son of a bitch, that's the character's name. There's also no more "Please Stand By" in the credits, as this is the end of the sitcoms.
Bravo!
Okay, and on to the finale where we watch Agatha absorbing Wanda's powers, similar to what she did to the witches during her trial. Throughout the episode, we actually start to see Wanda with her, similar to them, showing that her life force is being absorbed. Wanda realizes that she has to think outside the box and hits Agatha with a car, which is a similar move to what she pulled on Tony in Civil War during the airport scene. Upon examining the wreckage, she sees Agatha's boots, and this Wicked Witch of Westview moment is a clear call back to The Wizard of Oz. The Wizard of Oz has a similar aesthetic to the show in that a young woman travels into a strange land where people from the real world take on different roles, and of course the villain of both is a witch. White Vision comes down and he says Wanda, which is the first thing that the Hex version said upon materializing. He grabs Wanda's head, and this is similar to what he did to Ultron when cutting off his means of escape. Elsewhere, we learn that the entire Fox merger with Disney, which cost the latter company $71 billion, was actually just to do a joke. Haha, Ralph Boner, haha, much better than the X-Men coming to the MCU, that. It's what the fans wanted. Now, Boner is actually a character in Growing Pains, and as he seems like he might be a stoner, I'll always refer to him as Stoner Boner. Elsewhere, White Vision tries to rip the Mind Stone out of the Hex version's head, and this is a callback to how Thanos killed him in Infinity War. Jimmy is taken captive by Hayward, but after years of studying sleight of hand, he's able to steal a cell phone and unlock his handcuffs. Wanda journeys to the town square and comes across the mailman who says, "Don't shoot me, I'm just a messenger." This is something that he said to Agnes in episode 2 whilst making his rounds, likely showing that he's just in a loop, walking through the town and repeating the same thing over and over. He did say that bit about Sparky though, so I'll let the lad off. Now Agatha reveals that Wanda has a whole chapter dedicated to her in the Darkhold, and we see a drawing of the Scarlet Witch in it, which Wanda mimics the appearance of during the final scene. The character also has a hexagon surrounding her in the book, as well as the spells and incantations that we see being cast in the finale. Agatha says that her power is far beyond the Sorcerer Supreme, and this is why in the post-credits scene Wanda was able to read the Darkhold whilst also walking around. When Strange did something similar in his solo movie, he had to be asleep at the same time, and shoutouts to Darth Rahul for pointing that out. Wanda tears the hex open, but we see that her family get ripped along with it, and the Tetris effect on them further calls back to the House of M cover that we talked about earlier. The family do their Incredibles pose, and the kids end up using their powers, with Speed stealing a hat from a god, similar to what Quicksilver did in Days of Future Past. The two Visions discuss philosophy in the library, and this was the location that Vision broke all the way back in episode 2. This moment also calls back to the comics, in which there were two versions of Vision, similar to what we see that fuse together with one another. Wanda Speed sneaks up to Agatha and plants illusions into her mind, very similar to how she did to Tony Stark in Age of Ultron. Wanda goes into the illusion with her and materializes a red crown, which looks very close to the one that Agatha's mother had. Wanda takes the battle to the sky, and after setting up runes around the hex, she's able to absorb Agatha's power. This notion of runes was of course set up in Agatha's basement when she explained how magic worked. This idea of her teaching Wanda something does semi-tie in with the comics, as she was a mentor figure there, and going forward it looks like she might be one too. Now Wanda's costume is very interesting because it looks extremely similar in style to Magneto's from Days of Future Past. The family return home and say their goodbyes, and the one between Wanda and Vision is shot exactly the same way as their exchange in Infinity War. During that scene they plan to run away together, and in many ways the Hex has been that dream life for them. Now shoutouts to Ryan Airy again, I really hate that lad, for pointing out that them standing at the window looking out is very similar to the way that Fight Club finalizes. We've actually done a full breakdown of all the Easter eggs in that movie, so definitely check it out after this. Now Wanda leaves Westview, and in the first post-credit scene we watch Jimmy delegating jobs like Tommy Lee Jones in The Fugitive. Monica is summoned to the theatre, and on the banner we can see that they're showing the movie Tannhauser Gate, which is a reference to Blade Runner. In that, Roy Betty, a synthetic man like Vision, referenced this in his dying breath, but the conversation also focused on journeying out amongst the stars, which we know Monica will now be doing. In the post-credits scene we see Wanda at Wundagore Mountain, and she sits in a cabin by the lake. Shoutouts to Roman Suterik on Facebook for pointing out that the markings on Wanda's door come from a village in Slakovia. In Slavic mythology, Baba Yaga is a witch who was also mentioned in Ant-Man and the Wasp, and potentially this could be the Scarlet Witch, the bringer of the end of the world, and it's likely something that Wanda's gonna wrestle with. We see her astral projection, hear her children's voices, and then the theme for Doctor Strange comes in, which ends the series and sets up the Multiverse of Madness. Now that's the end of the video, and obviously I'd love to hear your thoughts below, and I just want to give a huge shout outs to all the Easter egg hunters who've been doing weekly breakdowns on the show since it started. Whether you're a real reject, a new rock star, or have a screen crush on Ryan Airy's mom, it's been beyond epic going through my heavy spoilers with you, U3C Films, the C which stands for Canadian Lad, so So you superhero nexus. Now, if you want something else to watch, then make sure you check out our breakdown of Avengers Endgame, which will be linked on screen right now. We've gone over the entire thing from top to bottom and pointed out all the Easter eggs just like this video, so it's definitely worth checking out if you want to know more. That out of the way, thank you for sticking through the video. I've been Paul. I'll see you next time. Take care. Peace.